A new Gallup poll has found a really stunning generational gap in the way young conservatives see Israel versus the rest of the broader right. And I want to get into them because they're super interesting. And I actually wrote about them over at Unheard this week. As a reminder, for the full premium experience of the show, you can subscribe over at undercurrents.tv. You get access to all kinds of great stuff on the Unheard website. I don't know if you get our daily emails at Unheard. I can't stop clicking the links personally every time I get an email because all of the articles sound so interesting. So make sure to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube. Now let's get into Gallup's findings, which were released on last Tuesday and found, quote, American approval of Israel's military action in Gaza has fallen 10 percentage points since the prior measurement in September and is now at 32%. 32%. That is the lowest reading since Gallup first asked the question in November 2023, according to the firm. So November 2023, that's right, obviously, after October 7th, and support for the war among the American public was much higher. Disapproval of the military action has now reached 60%, though, according to Gallup. Now, the gap between younger Republicans and older Republicans is not the only stunning gap that Gallup found. Their survey found a stunning gap also between Democrats and independents and Republicans in general. So 71% of Republicans still approve of Israel's military action in Gaza, according to Gallup. That number is compared with 25% among independents and 8% among Democrats. I mean, this is a polarized and divided country. That gap between Republicans and Democrats, 60 plus points, is just incredible. And even among independents. So Republicans are out on an island overall when you have that 71% figure compared to 25 and 8% among independents and Democrats. Now, interestingly, the same Gallup poll that was released last week found Trump's approval rating in general has declined 17 points among independents since the start of his second term, and that compares with 27%, or that's in addition to only 27% of independents approving of how Donald Trump has handled the conflict in Gaza. Trump obviously campaigned as a man who would bring peace in Ukraine, peace in Israel, and Gaza, and I think people in the Beltway bubble tend to underestimate how important that is to Trump's appeal. I think it was especially important in the 2015-2016 campaign season when Donald Trump was going to some of the areas with the heaviest concentration of people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and saying those wars were a mistake. Basically, that the public was sold a false bill of goods by elite Republicans in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and was proven basically to resonate with some of those same crowds who Republicans and Democrats to some extent, but mostly Republicans, had not picked up exactly on the sentiments and how much the sentiments about those military conflicts had shifted so quickly. Now, back in 2022, so before the Gaza war, independents were at 71% when it came to favorability for Israel. And that was right between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans were at 81% and Democrats were at 63%. That's really interesting. A Pew survey that was taken this spring found the generational gap. Listen to this. Republicans under 50, according to Pew, are now about as likely to have a negative view of Israel as a positive one. 50 to 48%. So 50% with a negative view, 48% with a positive view. But go back to 2022, and it was 63% to 35%. So positive to negative. So Republicans under 50, just in 2022, before the Gaza war, 63% saw Israel positively and 35% saw Israel negatively. Now, the negative view is 50% to 48%. That is just a huge, huge change. And Steve Bannon said to Politico last week, he said, "It seems for the under 30-year-old MAGA base, Israel has almost no support. Netanyahu's attempt to save himself politically by dragging America in deeper to another Middle East war has turned off a large swath of older MAGA diehards as well," he said. Now, MAGA diehards are not the entire Republican base, not all Republican voters, as Bannon himself would tell you. So those Gallup polls of 71% of Republicans are not necessarily still favoring the military action, are not necessarily mutually exclusive with what Bannon is saying, that some older MAGA diehards have been turned off by Trump's support for Netanyahu and then Netanyahu's actions since October 7th. But when you see those swings in favorability, when you see the swings in negative and positive among younger people, especially when you see the gap between Republicans and Democrats, the point that I just really want to make here, because we've seen several polls picking up on this difference between younger Republicans and older Republicans. Now, we're not talking just about 18 to 24-year-olds here. This Pew survey from earlier in the spring was Republicans under 50. There are a lot of older Republicans, obviously, though that changed in 2024. The makeup of the electorate changed significantly in 2024. So not exactly the same as it used to be on that point. But what I just want to highlight is so important about these numbers when you have, again, a massive gap between Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and really Republicans on one side and Democrats and independents on the other side. Republicans in presidential elections, in statewide elections, need independence. Donald Trump basically was able to regain, I want to say it was like 9 points with independents in the 2024 election versus 2020. That's a really critical demographic to do as well as possible with. And it's not as though anybody is going to the polls for the most part. The average American is not going to the polls in a presidential election or a senatorial election, for example, and saying, I am voting right now on the question of Israel. That's really rare. Most people vote on the economy. They vote on, immigration. Certain people vote on culture war issues, but it's rare that foreign policy, let alone this one question in foreign policy, is the single animating issue for an average voter. So it's not like Republicans are going to have to constantly be winning independence over by changing their tune on Israel. But when you have younger Republicans becoming a bigger and bigger part of the electorate, millennial Republicans, that Pew poll from earlier in the spring was under 50-year-old Republicans. So as that ages into being a bigger and bigger part of the demographic, as Gen Z Republicans and then Gen Alpha Republicans, whose primary memory of Israel is probably post-October 7th, politically at least, are aging into the electorate, and you have this absolute cratering with independent voters and sometimes with Democratic voters too. Because remember, Donald Trump won a not insignificant vote of Obama backers in certain Rust Belt states, those places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, people who voted Obama, Trump, then Biden and Trump maybe in some cases, but probably at least 2012 Obama, 2008 Obama, and 2016 Trump. That's a really important group of people also. And again, not people that are animated primarily by the question of the Middle East when they're making their decision in the polls. But it does mean that it becomes part of the decision that people have in their head on vibes, right? And a lot of people vote on vibes, like Andrew Schultz has talked about when he was looking at Trump in 2024. It was kind of vibes. Like Trump seemed like he wanted to be transparent, like he was anti-establishment. And now a lot of those same people are feeling like he isn't for peace. He isn't transparent. He isn't truly anti-establishment, and we could quibble over that and have a debate over that. But the sentiment is important, obviously, when you're talking about winning elections. So Republicans post-Trump then have to maintain a similar coalition. They're not putting the old coalition back together. So when you're facing questions about foreign policy, you're going to want to answer them in a way, and this is the most important point, in a way that doesn't completely alienate and upset and turn off independent voters and younger Republicans. A lot of people would argue, actually, that independents and younger voters delivered the presidency back to Trump in 2024. So all that is to say, the incentive structure for politicians has changed on Israel, right? There is no longer this blank check of reflexive default conservative support for Israel. There's a lot more skepticism and there's a lot more exasperation and frustration, especially after the 20-year global war on terror, and all of those conflicts, and seeing so many Americans die, seeing so many civilians die, seeing so much money being sent overseas. For example, while the Great Recession happened, and some people have still never climbed out of the Great Recession hole, and they see more and more money going to conflicts, whether it's in Ukraine or in Israel, and it just turns them off. It might not be the number one issue that they're voting on, but it does absolutely factor into the vibes. And I think people do tend to underestimate how much Trump's talk of peace, how powerful that is with the exasperated, exhausted American public, disgusted American public. So this is really something to keep an eye on. Of course, these things can swing, but it's a totally different. I mean, it's just the other thing to talk about here is how the gatekeepers in media, because I was considering just a hypothetical in my own head about, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who totally shattered the Republican taboo and used the word genocide to describe Israel's actions in Gaza recently. And I thought to myself, would Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2014, it's already a weird scenario because there wouldn't have probably been a Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2014 GOP circles. You know, she would have been treated like Christine O'Donnell was during the Tea Party years, and chased out, undermined by elite Republicans, whether you agree with it or not, but Republican leadership here in Washington. And if you remember Christine O'Donnell, that is a real deep cut. You can go look up the Saturday Night Live treatment of Christine O'Donnell as well. But that's kind of probably what would have happened with her, because the gatekeepers had more control. Mitch McConnell had more control. John Boehner at the time had more control over who was coming up. But when the gatekeepers have lost their power, because, for example, Steve Bannon's War Room is one of the top podcasts in the country, because Newsmax is a competitor in the cable space, because new conservative media outlets are actually really challenging some of the old ones, because you have the podcast space generally becoming an alternative to cable news, period, to newspapers, because you have Elon Musk's version of X, because you have TikTok. All of these different things mean that I actually don't know if Marjorie Taylor Greene type figure in 2014 would have used that word, would criticize this position in Israel in the stark terms that she has, because that would have meant you would be blacked out of media. You would not be asked to come on cable news, unless it was like MSNBC to dunk all over you. You wouldn't be quoted in the papers anymore, unless, again, it was to dunk all over you. You would just be a pariah. But now, if you say it, you're not a pariah. You actually have some not insignificant portion of support among the MAGA base in the Republican Party. I have this Marjorie Taylor Greene quote here from an interview she did with the Daily Mail recently. She says, "I don't know if the Republican Party is leaving me, or if I'm kind of not relating to it as much anymore. I think the Republican Party has turned its back on America first and the workers and just regular Americans." That's a line that's going to resonate deeply with a lot of normal people, whether they are with Marjorie Taylor Greene on everything or not. And I think, again, Republicans are underestimating how powerful that's going to be going forward into the future with normal people. And then also, I mean, that's sort of bringing together the Trump coalition in a weird way of normal people and diehard MAGA. People who wanted to see peace, people who wanted the establishment to be completely overturned. That's sort of the Andrew Schultz and MAGA bridge. And it's going to be hard for Republicans to reconstruct that bridge, especially if you don't see that Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, is talking in a way that is resonant and is real. And agree with her or not. Like, you can hate Marjorie Taylor Greene, but the way that she's speaking, I think all of you know this, sounds a lot more like average Republicans, just in tone, not even average Republicans, average Americans, sitting on a bar stool in, suburban Philadelphia or rural Georgia, wherever it is, it sounds a lot closer to the tone of the average voter than it does than anything that you're hearing out of Republican leadership these days. Mike Johnson sends everyone out on August recess to sell the one big beautiful bill and goes to Israel. That's where House Speaker Mike Johnson is now. While you have such disapproval among independents of Israeli military action. So you have the Republican establishment, because they're still at 71% overall, doubling, tripling down, and perhaps not understanding the political consequences of that in the future. Again, I don't want to overstate it. It's not people's top issue, but it does absolutely feed into the vibes that people get from the GOP, from Democrats, and that's important. And especially it's important when the old gatekeepers' power has eroded and there are new avenues for skepticism and criticism and all of that. So thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts as well, and we will be back soon with more.